Okay, hello and welcome back to the ADHD Goals podcast. I am your host, Laurence Pratt, and today I have another fantastic guest for you. His name is Dr. Christopher Scott Wyatt. He is an autistic self-advocate and a father of two neurodiverse daughters. He earned a doctorate researching online education and writing instructions for students with autism spectrum disorders. His experiences living with physical and neurological differences shape his parenting. Christopher Wyatt consults with schools, businesses, and non-profit organizations on issues of autism, neurodiversity, and active inclusion. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to spend the morning with you in my time zone anyway. Evening for you.
Well, yeah, I am. It's coming up to 4:45 in the afternoon here. I'm in London, and tell the listeners where you are.
So I am in Austin, Texas.
Wow. And I'm assuming it's quite hot there today.
Yes, I'm trying to think here. The conversion will be certainly over 37 C, so probably approaching 40, which here will be over 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, yeah. So I mean, obviously in Britain, we love to talk about the weather. Whenever we meet somebody, we go, "Oh, the weather's nice today," because it's a nice thing to not commit to talk about anything else. But usually it's very changeable, and eventually it'll rain sometimes, or it'll be overcast. But we've enjoyed a week of quite hot weather, and because we don't have consistent heat, we don't know what to do when it's consistently hot for a week. So you go to the shops and see people like picking up air conditioning units, and then typically the next day it's going to rain, and that's it. Summer over.
The benefit for me is, and this is going to sound odd, but both my daughter and I, my oldest daughter and I, we are really sensitive to clothing. One of the things that will really trigger me is a lot of clothing. So the summers here are nice because t-shirt and shorts, right? I can do a t-shirt every day instead of a business suit with a tie and a jacket and all of the things that itch and scratch and annoy me, or long sleeves that annoy my daughter. You know, the nice thing about summer, you do a t-shirt or a tank top and some shorts and you're done. Maybe some sandals, right? That's it.
Well, since I've been working from home, definitely t-shirts and shorts is my work uniform. You know, regardless of what the weather is outside, it's just a bit more comfortable, isn't it?
It is, you know, especially if you're sensitive to, you know, for us. So we were in Pennsylvania for 5 years, and before that, Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota area. And for those who aren't familiar with autism or sensory processing in ADHD, the layers of clothing, the tags, the seams, just having to layer and unlayer can be really stressful. So living in a place where you put on one layer is really nice. You just throw on the t-shirt and the shorts and you're done, and you don't have the, oh my gosh, this is scratching me, or the seams of this are bothering me. And you spend the whole day reaching back and adjusting the shirt tags and trying to get the tie just right. It sounds silly, but what I have found is that this has actually been a good adaptation for myself and my daughters, is not having to think about scarves and hats. I hate a hat. I don't like anything on my head. You know, so these are things where it sounds silly, but a warmer climate has actually been an accommodation of sorts for us, because the winters are so. I'm trying to think here. So, you know, you're in a more rainy, damp climate, but you're still thinking about in the winters and the falls, you know, whether or not you need rubbers, the galoshes or whatever you want to call them, you know, the layers of jackets to stay dry, an umbrella. And it's just, it gets to be really annoying and exhausting as we're here. Like I said, the fewer things I have to worry about, the fewer things I will misplace, lose, or be annoyed by.
Yeah, well, that's a big thing, isn't it? The misplay. Yeah, because like here, because the weather's so interchangeable, you might look outside the window and it be sunny when you're getting ready to leave. So you leave the house and you don't bring a coat, and then an hour later it's pouring it down with rain, or you wear the wrong shoes. But all that extra stuff you're taking with you, that's you've got to look after that all day, and as we both know, that's a challenge within itself.
Oh yeah, looking after things is even on a normal day, my wife and I, to adapt to my needs and to my daughter's, we do the morning checklist, which I'm sure everyone does. Do you have your wallet, your keys, your cell phone, your mobile? Do you have all these things ready to go? Do you have your lesson plans for the day? Do you have so we do a whole checklist before I even get in the car because
Mm,
I will leave something will be misplaced.
mm,
That's something I have to do. And so having not to worry about the weather is actually kind of convenient because it's one less thing I don't have to have on a checklist.
yeah. I often find that I can walk halfway down the street, and then it comes to me what it is that I've left. I live in constant fear that I'll walk out of the house without the keys, because I've got one of those locks that shuts behind me. So I'll start walking down the road, maybe I'm taking my dog for a walk, and then I'll be like, "I've got the keys."
Ah,
uh, Luckily, my neighbors have a key, or on one side I can jump over a fence. But it's all extra stress, really. Um, so anyway, let's for the sake for the benefit of the listeners, tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and your autism and ADHD. Um, how did you get to where you are?
uh, I was I was born at a time when little was known and a lot less respect for neurodiversity, whether it's ADHD, autism, learning disabilities, PTSD, whatever it is that alters the brain. There wasn't a lot known. I was raised in the 1970s and 80s, so there was still a stigma to being different, right? Everyone needs to conform, everyone needs to learn the same way. I struggled in school not because I was slow, but because I was accelerated enough that I often found myself on independent study or sitting at a table alone. The diagnosis of ADHD had followed me around. It was bad enough when I was in college that I did resort to at my now wife's assistant insistence to sit down with an educational psychologist, and then I was referred to a psychiatrist who could prescribe medication. So for a while, I tried the Ritalin and some other medications to cope with graduate school to try to get through that. The medications for me aren't very effective. They do more, I would say, negative side effects than positive benefits. So for me, the Ritalin really alters the appetite. It caused a lot of anxiety because it is a stimulant. So using stimulants to treat ADHD was really problematic for me. I also have other issues. So I have sensory processing issues. I was getting migraines. I was having what they thought was a dyskinesia or a palsy. I have Duchenne's palsy that is diagnosed from a birth injury, herb Duchenne's palsy. And so they assumed there were a lot of other things wrong because I would be moving or rocking and in pain, overload. But what happened was in 2000, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for the mental health professions was revised. It was the DSM-4 text revision. And as part of that text revision, the list for autistic traits went from this and this and this to an or. So it was this or this or this. And when that change occurred, I was working with a neuropsychologist to try to figure out why I was struggling in university. And they redid the evaluation, said, oh, well, you're not just ADHD, you now fit the criteria for autism. Uh, so that diagnosis happened when I was 36.
Mhm.
So I was 36 when they said, oh, you don't just have ADHD, all these sensory issues you're having, the other challenges, they're not just ADHD, you are also on the autism spectrum, which to me was a whole new concept. I just thought I was unfocused, struggling with, getting my work done with my schedule. So this dual diagnosis turns out to be very common. There are a lot of people now being identified as autistic ADHD. My family, I started to notice my daughters were both struggling. They are currently 12 and 10. The oldest was having a lot of the same issues. She was really advanced in school, found herself often sitting alone at the table to do her maths because she was ahead of everybody, or doing her own language arts. But she was constantly twitching. She's always moving her fingers and toes. She was doing some self-injurious calming, whether it was pulling at her skin or digging her nails in. She had some nervous habits that we thought were really concerning. So we had her evaluated as well. And I wasn't really surprised to hear that she was at least ADHD. We were then referred to a testing clinic in downtown Austin, Texas, that did a screening for her. And it came back that her social skills, her ability to read faces, the poor eye contact, she met most of the criteria for the autism spectrum as well. So she now has the same dual diagnosis that I do, which is ADHD with the autism spectrum. The youngest, we really knew there was something up when the teachers in her grade 1 class were putting her at what they called the wiggle table. So the
Mm,
wiggle table was where they were putting the children who wouldn't sit still and wouldn't pay attention the way the teachers want them to pay
mm,
attention. So she's also always in motion.
mm,
Again, not surprising, she got the ADHD diagnosis. We are still waiting for another evaluation. She also has signs of dysgraphia or dyslexia. We think it might be dysgraphia, but the the assessments are still in progress. Assessments are extremely difficult to obtain. They're expensive here in the United States. It takes a very long time to get a formal assessment in the UK or in Canada. So getting the assessment was a waiting game. Plus, we had to pay, through private insurance for part of it here in the United States. But it's very common in every one of the Western nations that it takes 6 months to a year to get the assessment. It's just the new norm.
mm,
And it's gotten worse after the pandemic. Now they're taking a year.
mm.
So she also has ADHD. In the case of our youngest, the one we call Anne on my podcast and on my blog, Anne, Anne just could not focus. And the doctor said, we think your youngest would benefit from medication. And based on my experience where it didn't work and had triggered anxiety and other things, we're very hesitant. So what
Mm,
has happened with her over the last 2 years is we have tried different medications until we have found a combination that seemed to help her. But again, this was not a decision that I made lightly with my wife. We were both hesitant to medicate a child, especially a 10-year-old, but it has made a difference. She just finished her grade 4 and she made what they call AB honor roll. So she was with the A and B level, which was just a transformation. She was in the top dozen of her class. She really has done exceedingly well on medication. It does, she seems a little lethargic sometimes and a little sleepy sometimes. So we're still trying to find the right balance. So for me, medication didn't work, and that made me hesitant.
mm,
For the oldest, she's fine with very little medication. She's on an anti-anxiety medication to help her sleep at night. But the youngest needed ADHD medication. She needed
mm,
that extra support, or she just can't sit still and she will not participate in school. Schooling for her is boring. She wants to be running
mm.
about, doing her own thing, and
Yeah,
we needed to help her. So that's our story as a family.
yeah.
My wife is not ADHD or autistic, so she's
Well, that's
often
what I was going to ask you.
frustrated.
Yeah, I was, I mean, whilst you were talking there, I was thinking of lots of questions because there's interesting things that you brought up there. But I'll go to the most recent thing that you said, that it was about your wife. I was going to ask, so she's not got ADHD. She's neurotypical. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about your own past experiences and then witnessing your children having, ADHD and autism and things like that, and then you have this ADHD autism lens that you're saying, well, from your experience, you're careful about medication, etc. How do you negotiate those conversations with your wife when she is neurotypical? Does that cause, does she have to trust your perspective? Does she have other perspectives that you have to listen to? How does it work?
But I would argue that I am very poor at taking care of myself. I
Hmm.
don't always, go to the doctor when I need to or go to the emergency room. We know that my oldest is also very bad at body awareness, that there have been incidents where we've said, oops, we think we need to get you to the doctor, even though you don't think so.
Hmm.
So my wife is very good at paying attention and saying, okay, whether it's the girls or me, she's very good at saying something is off and we need to follow up on this. She was So my wife Susan is an engineer. She's an aeronautical and mechanical through training, but she's in charge of technical documentation for a company. She's very organized. That's the only way you become someone like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Overseeing technical documentation in engineering fields, you are extremely linear thinker.
Is
You
she in
have
charge of
checklists.
the is she in charge of the morning checklist?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And so that morning checklist routine, she has a laminator where she has put up checklists in the bathroom for the girls. She has chore charts for the girls. But when it came to things like medication and doctors, my wife and I trade off going to the doctor. And that way we each get a chance to hear what the doctors are saying. We have discussed very carefully how we want to minimize the medical interventions, but we know that they're necessary.
Hmm.
Um, so from my point of view, I want to minimize it. And, certainly from my wife's point of view, we want to maximize the success of the girls. So both of us want the girls to be able to be as natural as possible and on as little supports as possible. And that's always our goal is, as little medication as possible, as little additional therapy or supports as possible. But we certainly want them to have those supports to succeed. So
Yeah.
that negotiation, I think, comes from being my wife. It has made her very aware of my challenges. And so I think it makes her acutely aware that we want the girls to have a better future.
I suppose it's finding that balance between using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, but also at the same time, if you take it slowly and say what can we help with the conditions before we try medication, to probably understand what levers need tweaking first. But as you were saying in your, I think it was your youngest daughter, you needed sort of some sort of intervention quickly to start sort of a process of helping her. So one other thing that I was interested in, obviously you mentioned that you grew up in the 70s and 80s, and you mentioned the word stigma around your ADHD label. I'm curious to know what your opinion is between the stigma around the label that you felt as a child growing up, between what you're witnessing your children, and has that, the weight of the label, the what that label means, has that changed in that time?
It has for learning disabilities and ADHD. It has changed because there's more awareness. Also, as a university instructor, I get what's called disability resources letters for any student who has special needs in testing or reading or assignments. It's not uncommon now for a quarter to a third of my students to have some sort of disability resources connection. So when I was young, it was rare to see a child with glasses, with braces. A lot of these things were now. We think nothing of a class where maybe a third of the students are wearing glasses or contacts. Braces on your teeth are now just sort of a normal thing. I think our concept of medical interventions has altered, especially with ADHD, with so many young people being diagnosed now. I do worry about overdiagnosis. I
Mhm.
do worry that behaviors that are just children being children. I do wish our schools were less rigid in some ways so we could just let the kids burn off their energy and maybe that
Mm,
would help a lot. Um, so I think the stigma in some areas has declined. In other areas, I'm not sure because the autism label still carries with it a certain stigma about ability. So when people hear autistic, they still wonder about ability and they still wonder about empathy. A lot of people still believe that autistics can't connect to other individuals because we have a difficult time reading faces. I have a very difficult time reading expressions or hearing sarcasm. I'm not very good at idioms and other figurative speech. I do much better if you just tell me what you mean. And so does my oldest. So but there are these built-in biases against autistics because there's this sense that we aren't socially adept, we aren't skilled in social settings or with relationships, when really it's just we have a different way of communicating. We're
mm,
not good at the hinting, we're not good at the suggestions or the word games. Tell us what you mean and we're okay.
mm,
And because of the sensory sensitivity that many autistics have, including myself and my daughter, we do avoid certain situations, loud crowds, sudden noises, textures we don't like. So it's not that we're being antisocial, it's that we're trying to protect ourselves from too much input.
mhm.
People do assume they'll say things like, "Oh, well, you're no fun."
Oh,
Well, I don't know if I'm no fun or not, but like tomorrow, my daughter and I are going to go on a photo safari. Um, we're going to take the cameras and take a drive through the country here in Texas and look for antelope and deer and maybe some other animals in the wild and take some pictures. But we're happy doing that as where being at a crowded concert, for a rock concert is not necessarily my ideal situation. It's not, no.
uh-huh. Well, I had a similar situation. I live where I live in London is not too far away from the Notting Hill Carnival. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's a big carnival we have every year. And since having kids, I've not been there myself or taken them to it. And I thought, oh, they're old enough now. I'll we'll go and have a look. I must admit, it is very intimidating. There's a lot of loud music. It's just in the streets, so there's lots of sound systems everywhere, and everybody's sort of kettled into narrow streets, and most of the people are young people wanting to party. So there is a family day, but nevertheless, it was all too much for both of them really. But they just cried and wanted to leave because it was just all too much. So um, you said something about the safari, and I just wanted to check. So where you are, you can go out into the wild and just see these fascinating animals because I know here in the UK when you say safari, we do have, I think it was the West Midlands Safari Park, where you go and drive around in your car, basically drive through a zoo, and then some monkeys will just try and steal your window wipers.
So one of the things that's hard to explain about Texas, right? We have the last I saw, we have 33 million residents.
Yeah.
But Texas, if you were to take it and overlay it on a map, would cover a large chunk of the
Oh.
continent. So, for example, I went to Dallas for a conference a couple of days ago. Dallas is a 3-hour drive, and that is a very high rate of speed because we have tollways where basically you can go as fast as your car can go.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
So, I pay the fee for the tollway and shoot up at a high rate of speed and can make it in about 3 hours.
Mm.
Where I work, in fact, is 2.5 to 3 hours from our house
Oh, wow.
because the
Okay.
university is in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Um, so Texas distances so as I drive to the university, I go through a lot of preserve land. So there is the Brazos River, there's a number of valleys. We have a lot of open area that is not developed, thankfully. So even
Hmm.
with 30 million people, we have a lot of space. So does California, obviously. You have the sequoias, you have Yosemite National Park. So the Western US, unlike the East Coast of the United States, we have a lot of parkland and wide open space. I mean, it is truly wide
Mm.
open. So last year, when I took my daughters to campus with me, we paused on the way home and saw a herd of antelope.
Wow.
And yeah, so the song, I don't know if you've heard the song Home on the Range, and it's the
Yeah.
Give Me a Home or the Antelope Roam,
Oh, okay. That's it.
we have actually had a bobcat in our backyard.
Oh, wow.
There's nothing like seeing a wild cat in your backyard. It's like, oh, well, okay. We have, the standard animals, just like in the UK, where you get your hedgehogs, we get possums, skunks, lots of skunks.
Mm.
We must have at least a dozen rabbits in our backyard right now that unfortunately seem to like the vegetable garden.
Hmm.
So,
Oh, well, I have in London we have urban foxes
oh
that tend
yes,
they tend to understand what day your bins get collected, and
yeah.
they have a field day essentially, and the noise they make when they're enjoying themselves at night is quite remarkable.
So yeah, we take when we say a safari, we mean going out into the country and being quiet and watching, the antelope or the deer,
Mm,
getting some pictures of those. We also have a lot of wildflowers, so you can, just take pictures of flowers on the rolling hills, and that's nice and quiet. The Oddly enough, the opposite end of that we use for, I don't know if you want to call it therapy, but all of my family, my daughters, my wife, myself, we are all into music. And as I said, a loud rock concert's probably not our venue of choice,
mm,
but music is calming because, you put on your headphones, you have your instrument. Um, you can play for yourself in most cases, with the
hmm
exception of a few instruments.
hmm
So we like to be outside where there's almost nobody, or with music where
mm.
it's in a quiet and controlled environment.
Well, you were talking earlier about obviously we were just talking about the weather, but it sounded like you had made a conscious decision to move to where you are. And I wonder, did the sunshine and nature play any role in the calming effect that it has in your decision to move, or was it completely unrelated and work based?
Oh no! In fact, when we moved here, I did not have a job.
Okay.
We moved just before the pandemic. One of the problems with living in the north in the United States is, places like Buffalo, New York, it's not uncommon to get 2 meters of snow.
Yeah.
So you're looking at, 6, 7 feet of snow. Nobody wants to have snow that's taller than they are. Um, we have pictures of my wife clearing a walkway where the snow is taller than she is on either side. And you're stuck inside for 4 months, 5 months, sometimes longer,
Mm,
depending on the season. And for our children, getting them outside so they could ride a bike, go for a walk, play in the park, we have, uh, we are very fortunate here because we're out in the edges of the city. We have what's considered a double lot. So we have a massive lot where they can run around in the backyard, or go down to the community pool and park. Uh, we went down the street into the open territory and flew kites
mm,
in the last few weeks. So those are things we can do. And for the girls, when they are really needing a chance to move about, if you live in a small urban area like Minneapolis, Minnesota, the homes are so close that they either are touching or you're in a duplex or you don't really have a yard, as you know, living in London, right? You,
Mm,
you share a backyard, a lot of shared spaces, but not much of your own space.
mm,
And the houses have to be small. You're in an urban area. I miss being able to catch a train to work. I do that. I
mm,
certainly miss the subways of Pittsburgh or the light rail of Minneapolis. But here in Texas, the girls can go outside when they need to get out and run and be silly and then come back and continue their homework. They can. School doesn't get canceled for snow. We don't have a lot of those things that when someone has ADHD or they're autistic and they need a break from the sensory input, I find nothing is more calming than the outdoors, but it's very hard and very expensive for most of us to either afford that or that luxury of being able to go out into the country. So we're
mhm.
very fortunate. I know that.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the pandemic being the time that you moved. I remember, certainly here in the UK, we had certain legislations around, people were supposed to stay in, so they gave us an hour each day to sort of walk around and go outside. But I suppose, so if you think about the extreme conditions of, oh, now I can't do anything, but I can go out for 1 hour a day. It forced you to go out and make the most of that 1 hour of the day. So suddenly your perspective on that 1 hour of outside time changed. I was fortunate it was the summer at this time. But yes, I mean, a lot of people had a horrible time during the pandemic, obviously. But for me, there's time off work, and then there was this concentrated time outside. I have a dog, and I was walking. I was fortunate enough to find some nature to get to fairly easily. I found it, yeah, it was really beneficial to me to sort of reconvene with nature, and it was wonderful. But I
Yeah.
mean, it's obviously there was, different things happening for different people that meant that wasn't the case. But yeah, nature's fantastic
Well,
for that.
we benefit from having the backyard that's ours. Like I said, we have sacrificed in some ways because we don't have the public transit. But we're within walking distance of restaurants and a little coffee shop and stuff is walking distance away out in our little community. So we could walk around quite a bit, and we do. We walk to the local streams and stuff. But to get to and from work, you do have to drive. There is
Mm,
no choice where we live. I have to drive to the school.
mhm. So you mentioned the school there, but I'm keen to sort of get your insights on the educational piece, and you mentioned something that caught my attention earlier about sometimes you wish that the children were allowed to burn off the energy at school. Uh, um, Certainly from a UK perspective, there seems to be this obsession with the way schools are managed by the government. So, you'll have a minister that is a minister for education, and they want to know, are the schools doing a good job? The only way that they don't necessarily, their job description is not to have any understanding of how schools work. They just want to see the numbers that say this is going up, correlation, it's going up, it's improving. And the only way for them to do that is to do more exams so that we can put more numbers into a school performance table. That and what is happening is that they're more concerned about the league tables within the country and then how they compare to other countries, that and how they're performing over specific subjects, sort of like maths, science, etc., that they are minimizing the amount of time in physical education, in drama, uh, things where people can move around, and there seems to be sort of no care in the arts or creativity, and it's all channeled into these core academic subjects, and it feels like, from my perspective, that's bad news for people with ADHD, autism, where or, if they're kinetic learning, they need to move, have fidget, around to be engaged. So how is it in the, in the States? Is there a is there is that getting worse, or what's the situation there?
I am frustrated that throughout the developed nations, and I know that's uh, you know, not the best phrase, but the Western
Mhm.
nations,
Yeah.
we have been cutting the arts. We have been cutting the things that actually help people with ADHD or learning disabilities or the autistics among us, the neurodiverse like myself. So when I look at the two schools that my daughters are in, the youngest, her school doesn't have a music program anymore.
Mm.
Well, so what we're going to do is we're going to pay. So in a week or two, she's going to go to music camp. Hopefully, she'll start private music in the fall. The oldest is in music lessons and is in a band. She does bass, drums, and keyboard. Um,
That's
and
good.
those are her things, but they don't have it in the school like that. The
Yeah.
schools have focused so much on the maths and the reading and writing that they are sacrificing the skills that reinforce the sciences, reinforce history, reinforce all of these learning things that they value, right? They value math and they value literature and writing, but think about it. So I see that you have a keyboard back there with a station.
Mm-hmm.
The best thing about music is you can start talking about, oh, we have a whole note, a quarter note, an eighth note, a 16th note. We have 4/4 time, 3/4 time. You can talk about the notes. Okay, well, 440 is C. How does this work in science? What's the science of the music? How does our electronic keyboard get the MIDI into the computer? You can bring in science, you can bring in history. You obviously with music, you've got math.
Mm-hmm.
And then they take these things out, not realizing that when you're teaching music, you're teaching fractions, you're teaching science, you're teaching history. When did Beethoven live? Why is Beethoven still important in music? Well, there's some history. Why did music in the United States, when we take a look at music in the United States and especially the UK, the influence of jazz and the black music scene of the 1930s and 40s is unmistakable from the Beatles on, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's all these wonderful opportunities to talk about history through music, folk songs, and anti-war movements, and the union movement, because the union movements were largely carried by song. So what do? They remove music programs
Mm-hmm.
to save money and focus on, well, the other subjects, forgetting that music is a gateway for many of us who struggle with the reading and the math concepts. Music is a perfect gateway to those other subjects.
Yeah.
Art, you get rid
Well,
of painting. It's the same thing. You're talking about fractions and mixing and science, color science and lightweight. But no, we'll cut art.
yeah.
And kids
It
struggle in science.
seems to be an obsession with thinking about everything in isolation. And what you've described there is you know if you want a child to have an interest in a subject like maths, the chances are, not every child is going to enjoy just raw maths. But
No.
if you show a child how they can apply maths, it's something in the real world, something that they're interested in. So obviously, from an ADHD point of view, we're an interest-based, interest system. And so if you're just going to show me numbers, I'm going to switch off. But if you're going to say you can play music and this is how the numbers make sense, you're going to be interested in learning how that all works, comes together. And I think there's such an obsession with just teaching the lesson for the lesson's sake, or improving, isolating one subject for one. They don't even tell you what you're learning this subject for. There's no talk about what you're going to do, you know, what jobs you can do in the real world. It's just, no, let's get you ready for this exam. And it's pointless. If you've got ADHD, you're not going to be interested in that. You're going to switch off.
And So with my background and my studies, and what I look at, what I have found is that a lot of autistics and people with ADHD, the learning disabled, people with, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, we learn. We can be artists. There are lots of great artists who had learning disabilities like dyslexia,
Mhm.
but we learn through application. So if I want to teach math to my daughters, we go into the kitchen, right? You can get out the scale and say, okay, I need 500 grams of this, or I need,
Mm.
a liter of this, or whatever it is that you're doing.
Mhm.
And you can teach math, right? You can teach science. Okay, I'm going to bake this. Well, the baking soda is going to do this with the salt, which is going to cause this chemical reaction, which is going to make the biscuit light and fluffy.
Mhm.
Yeah, and who doesn't like light and fluffy, right? So
Yeah.
we can talk about the baking soda versus the baking powder and all these things. You can bring science and math to all these subjects. When my daughter and I go out tomorrow and take pictures, we can talk about fractions because focal length is done in fractions, right? You have your f-stop is a
Mhm.
fraction. 1 over 11, 1 over 5.6. You can talk about the fractions and the focal length and the light science and the mirrors. All of these arts are things that we learn.
Mhm.
Every person I know who loves music learns more about math and science through music than from a textbook
Mm.
because they want to play music. Oh my gosh, I really want to know this. So now my daughter wants to know how the chords work, or how you on the keyboard or on the drum, why there are certain settings, the different sounds that you get from the different shape of the instruments. Now I know nothing about drumming or bass guitar, but what she's learning in those, or what I understand what she is learning from keyboard, um, it's much easier for her to understand a fraction musically than it was numbers on a page.
Mm.
And both of the girls, I think, and this is, so, as I said, true of the students I work with, even at the university level, when you make it something that's applied, their attention is easier to maintain. Who wants to look at a sheet of math problems? Not
Yeah.
me.
No, that's
But if
that's
you ask a
precisely when I
student,
switch off.
yeah, but if you ask a student, okay, the flutes are going to be playing 16th notes, the drums are going to be keeping the quarter beat. You start doing this. Now, how many notes did the flute player play versus, whatever, the bass player or whatever? Now that the student's interested because they want to play well in the music, in their band, so they know, oh, well, on the upbeat, I need to come in. Now you can start talking about fractions. We don't do that. Instead, like you said, we cut the math, we cut the um, uh, we cut the music, which affects the math.
Mhm.
We cut the applied math. We cut the
Mm.
applied science. And so, no, we're not taking the right approach. And part of it, as you said, it's the politicians. Uh, Here in Texas, it's the same thing. Well, we want to prove that our schools are doing well because if they're not doing well, we're going to punish the headmaster, principal, superintendent, whatever, if they're not making such and such gains since the pandemic. And the only way they know if the gains are being made is to make everyone take a test.
Mm.
This
Yeah.
is this is insanity.
Mm. Yeah, there seems to be no trust in just, well, allowing teachers to do their thing, and trusting that they're doing their job. It has to be proven through data.
And in our cultures, especially parts of the United States, certainly parts of Canada and the US, here in Texas, it's did you get into the right university?
Mm.
Do you get your A levels here, your SAT, at, whatever score? Did you get into the right university? And these things are all driven by data now. And I understand that it's the meritocracy. Everyone wants to be fair, so we're going back to the old days of numbers. Um, but what about the student who's incredibly brilliant, but not good at test taking?
Mhm.
That worries me. So educationally, what I find is that students with ADHD and autism do better with applied learning. And yet that's exactly what, since COVID, we have been cutting the most. And
Mm.
we need to not be doing that.
Mm. So tell me a little bit more about what it is when you are working with the schools and universities. What is it that you help with? And tell me a bit more about that.
So this week I was just doing some presentations, and I was talking about what we call natural accommodations. So,
Hmm.
for example, we put students increasingly in rooms without windows, so they have artificial light. We have gotten rid of open spaces and activity times. A natural accommodation is when you make a space inviting to everybody without it seeming like an effort to accommodate one or two people. So we know that students who are neurodiverse are prone to headaches, migraines, and light sensitivity, for example. In particular, fluorescent lights, some of the LEDs we now use are the compact fluorescents. So the more natural lighting you can accommodate, the better it is for them. Well, it turns out that natural lighting also helps the body rhythms and emotional cycles of other students, and it improves the mood of a room. So, a natural accommodation would be to argue that more new schools need more windows and classrooms with windows instead of walls so you can hang things.
Mm.
So, those are natural accommodations. Natural accommodation is saying um, we need ramps instead of steps because we have a lot of students who struggle with mobility. Uh, Even if you're not in a wheelchair or using crutches, there are those of us who have mobility challenges. Um, so ramps are good. And I point out that if you put a ramp in a school, the ramp doesn't just help the person in a wheelchair, but as a teacher, I'm constantly moving gear, whether it's a projector, a computer cart, you name it, I'm rolling a cart, right? Because I'm in
Hmm.
multiple classrooms. So the ramp is a natural accommodation because it's not just helping the person with the disability, but it turns out that all the teachers like, wow, these ramps have really made it easier to move our computer cart.
Yeah.
So a natural accommodation is when you add an accommodation to a space that actually helps everybody and seems like it flows better for everybody. That's what we call a natural accommodation.
Yeah. So it's like saying, if we design for just somebody who looks like they are smack bang in the middle, you're excluding everybody on the edges. But if you design for the edges, everybody is better off. It's not an inconvenience. It's everybody has a better experience.
Absolutely. And my specialty is online spaces. And
Ah.
I get a lot of complaints from people saying, well, why do we need captions? Well,
Mm.
my last class, I had three students who were either deaf or hearing impaired. So the captions should always be there.
Mm.
Also, there are students like myself where I can't take notes and pay attention. So having the captions saved, I can go back and read them later
Yeah.
because I really struggle with focus. I mean, hello, that's ADHD. If I'm taking notes, I forget what's being said. I get
Mm.
lost. So a
Mm.
natural accommodation in a classroom is providing the notes, providing audio recordings of some materials. It's providing materials not just in text, but maybe in braille, maybe audio, maybe all these different formats.
Mhm.
During the pandemic, a lot of teachers were complaining, well, now I'm having to record my lecture, I'm having to post the text, I'm having to do all this extra work. And my argument is schools should have been doing all of these things all along.
Mm.
We should have been making our notes available to students who need notes, audio books available to students who need audio. And again, that's natural accommodation because then if a student needs it on audio, they don't have to come up to me and say, Dr. Wyatt, I really can't read well. I've got dyslexia. Do you have an audio book for me? No, I just make the audio book available on my campus website. If a student wants it, they get it. They never have to come to me and disclose a disability because whatever their need is, I have naturally accommodated it.
Mhm.
So, my course that I'm teaching this summer, every lecture is up there. All of my notes are up there. All of my slides are up there. As I said, so it's delivered in multiple what they call modalities, which is a silly word, but it just means that I provide audio, text, video, etc.
Mhm.
So what I'm doing is by supplying all those resources in all those formats, no student with a special need needs to come to me and say, I have dyslexia, I have dysgraphia, I have a vision impairment, I have an audio impairment. They don't need to do that. All they need to know is if they're taking a class with Dr. Wyatt, the way that they need those materials will be already available without going to disability resources, getting a medical diagnosis, jumping through the hoops. Because as I said at the very beginning, getting a diagnosis here in the United States, in the UK, in Canada, in Australia, it is not uncommon for an autism or an ADHD diagnosis to take 6 months, or in some districts, a year,
Mm-hmm.
depending on where you are in the NHS or where you are in which state here in the US and which healthcare system.
Well, unfortunately, it's a lot worse here in the UK, a lot longer. We're in multiple years for adults now. It's about 2 years, so and even more. But yeah. So I
Yes.
mean, sorry, I jumped in on your point, but
Yeah, so should someone who has to wait 2 years to get help, or should our classrooms be places where you know that you likely have ADHD, you can't get the formal diagnosis, but wow, the classroom has the material for me as audio. I can listen to the audio and I can
yeah.
stop it if I need to stop it, rewind it and replay it because it's like a podcast. So the conference I was just at was at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas, which is, as I said, north of us about 3 hours. It was instructors from all over the world. There was a wonderful set of instructors from Boston, Boston, Massachusetts, here in the United States. And what they do is they're making every single classroom multimodality. So every classroom will have all resources in print, in audio, in video, in other ways to access, like Braille. These are steps that they're taking in their area. Now, obviously, Boston, Massachusetts is a big city with millions of people, a lot of universities, and a lot of resources. As I'm in rural Texas.
Hi guys, just wanted to briefly take a moment of your time to thank you for listening to this episode and just ask you for your support. If you are enjoying the podcast and you are able to, I'd love it if you could subscribe on whatever platform that you're listening or watching on. And if you know of anybody that you think this episode will help, then please share it with them. That would be a really, really great help. And if you know anybody or you yourself are finding that the challenges of managing your ADHD are getting a little bit too overwhelming and you want to find a way of moving towards your goals, then please do not hesitate to get in touch. You can go over to my website at ADHDgoals.co and you can connect with me there. Okay, well, without further ado, I will take you back to the episode.
Our school district has one senior high school, one school through grade 12. We don't have a lot of expertise, but you know what? We can train every teacher to do this. We can train every teacher to accommodate. So the students and the parents don't need to go in and file paperwork and beg for access and say, gee, my son or daughter has these needs. Please let us fill out this paperwork to get these supports. Parents shouldn't have to beg for support. The support should be built in naturally into the class for
So
all learning styles.
how did the school that you're at right now, how did it come about? Did they approach you because they knew that with you they were getting this expertise in inclusion, or were you there for another role and coming with you comes this expertise and they're like, oh, this is really changing things for us, this is fantastic? Well, I mean, what I'm trying to ask is, was there already the awareness that they needed to make these improvements, or did the improvements come because you were able to advise on them?
We are extremely aware. So to put it in perspective, Texas A&M University has 75,000 students.
Right.
We are a city.
Yeah.
That is just the school. I mean, that's just our campus of 75,000 students. We are massive. We are the largest public university in the United States.
Wow.
So it was known. We have a very active training program. I have spoken at training training conferences on campus where we continue to train our support faculty. We are doing a lot of things that hopefully help. We have a program called the Spectrum in Aggie Land, which is the autism spectrum, but also just all neurodiversity, including ADHD. There are a lot of supports for students. We are working to add supports for faculty and staff. The reason for this is we know these students have these needs, and the more of them we can educate, the more likely they are to become productive members of society that don't need public support. And I know that sounds self-serving, but public education in the United States, one of our largest bottom line expenses is special education. It costs a lot of money to do special education as a special program. But if you make your classes naturally inclusive, now you don't have the added expense of special education. Now it's just, oh, every classroom has audio, video, etc. Every classroom has an open resource textbook. So that was a decision. When I interviewed, that was part of the interview, was they were aware of my publications and speaking. They asked if I would also do additional trainings. I did meet with our HR department. Schools are trying to take a very proactive stance in the United States. They aren't everywhere. I know that. I have friends in Canada, and it very much depends on the province. It really depends on where you live. I hate to say it, but your postal code seems to determine whether or not you get supports. And that's true everywhere.
I've just popped into my head, and I don't know if it's a good idea to ask it, but politically, obviously, you're gearing up for elections towards the end of the year. Is this on the on the political agenda? How high up is this? Obviously, I suppose in your opinion, it's not high enough, but is it being raised enough? Are both parties sort of vying for your vote and saying, look, we're going to improve inclusion in education, or is it not being spoken about?
So I will, in the United States, because we have a very tiered system, just like the UK, we have our private and public schools. Canada does the same, where some Catholic schools get some public money. In the United States, depending on the state, here in Texas, there is a movement towards what we call charter schools and public vouchers. The politicians use education without understanding education. Oh, I will give you money to send your kid to the local Catholic school, or I will give you money for this, and it's all tax money, right? It's all coming from the same place. I wish that our politicians would instead focus on funding the schools we have better instead of complaining about them. But both sides, here in our Democratic Party, which is our Labor Party, our Conservative Party, which is the Republican Party, both of them propose solutions which are basically replacing or tearing down our current system, and that troubles me deeply. Instead of replacing our current schools, what we really need, and no one wants to say it, is just more money. We need more money for our teachers to get training. We need more money to make our school buildings more accommodative. We need more technology to help the teachers record their lessons or whatever. Whether you're in Europe, the UK, Australia, it breaks my heart how many teachers I talk to who are trying to be inclusive. So what they do is they spend their own money on recording devices. They spend their own money on podcasting equipment. They spend their own money on all these resources. Why doesn't the school have a recording studio? Why doesn't the school have a camera in the classroom? Why doesn't the school have? So the politicians in Texas, their solution is to say, oh, well, see, our public schools are failing, so we're going to give money to charter schools, which are privately run. So everyone comes up with the same solution of tear down our current schools and replace them, when really the solution is, I wish both parties would say the solution is, let's invest more in our local schools instead of trying to blame them for everything. Just because you build a new building with new administrators and new processes does not mean you will get better results. If you're going to do the same old uniforms, the same old marching in line, the same old 8 to 3 or 8 to 4. You're not going to get different results. You're just going to have a new shiny building
Yeah.
run by a new set of people with new political agendas. That doesn't solve anything. But unfortunately, as you noted, both sides. Oh well, we've got to stress language and math, so we're going to cut the arts. We've got to improve this. We've got to be, we've got to be culturally aware, so we're going to cut some history lessons. This isn't education. Cutting is not education. The
No.
ideal education would have a rich arts program with a music teacher getting paid the same as every other teacher. It would have a physical education teacher getting the paid the same as every other teacher. We would invest in education instead of constantly tearing it down. So education is an issue. Take what we call a blue state, a liberal state like California. They are doing charter schools. They are moving money out of the normal public schools into some of these charter schools. They do it called magnet programs. Oh, we'll have a school for the performing arts. We'll have a school for arts and science, a school for this, a school for that. I don't know about you, but at grade 4, I didn't know what I was really going to be. I had an idea, but I wasn't really sure. I believe everybody should be getting a little bit of everything forever.
Yeah. I was just about to say, I just turned 42 at the weekend, and I'm still not sure what I want to be when I grow up.
Right. But, if I tell my girls, if I had my dream, I'd be an artist. But, I'd have my music and I'd have my digital art and my video and those things. I'd be a creator.
Mm.
And that's what I bring into my classroom. Is there are ways to do that as an educator? But is education an issue? Absolutely. Every president runs on it nationally. Every party runs on it nationally. We have, I'm going to get this wrong. I believe we have the two major parties and 4, they call them third parties, but we have 4 fairly significant ancillary parties, right? We have our Greens, so we have our Green Party, the environmental socialists, they're out there. We have our libertarians who are the radical free market, we don't need any laws. We can all just, we'll all be great people and get along just fine. So we have all these fringe parties too, and they all campaign on education. Everybody wants education to be their issue, but all of them offer the same solution, which is we'll start over.
Mm.
And I don't think you can when you have millions of students scattered across a country. You can't just start over. We can't blow up the system. It won't work.
It'd take time to build as well.
Yeah, what we need to do is invest in our young teachers, invest in our experienced teachers, our teachers who are 40 and 50, like, those of us who are in 40s and 50s, right? We can still be taught. I can certainly learn new things. We need to be out there with every teacher, every school offering supports and training instead of saying, well, the kids didn't do well after COVID and it must be you.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what both in our system, the Republican Party solution right now is to basically starve the schools and encourage everyone to send their kids off to a religious school, which isn't going to make them any better. Right, Louisiana, which is a state not far from us, they now want to put the 10 commandments in every classroom. Right, they just passed a law that they're going to put the 10 commandments in the classroom. That is not going to improve test scores.
It might
I don't know.
counting to 10, it might.
Yeah. Thou shalt not. Okay, great. We're going to put the 10 commandments in every classroom, but what does this do educationally? Nothing. It just makes them feel good. Texas, we passed a law where every campus, because we had campus shootings, because we have such strange gun laws in the United States. So Texas passed a law that every school has to have a full-time police officer with a gun to stop any possible violence.
Mm.
So now instead of paying for a teacher, you're paying for an armed guard at every single school.
Mm.
This is an insane waste of money, but again, because our federal gun laws won't change, the states now are saying, well, our schools need to spend money on security.
Yeah,
this is insanity.
It's consistently not looking at the root cause of a problem. It's just fixing what they see is at the surface.
I know this sounds simplistic, but so New Zealand, after the very horrible incident they had with a mass shooting, they really cracked down on the gun laws, and it had a very instant effect on violence, even domestic violence at home, because that's where most violence occurs. It's partner abuse or child abuse. But here in the United States, we get a mass shooting every day now. We average 400 and some odd a year, more than one a day. So the schools end up with lockdown drills, gun drills, armed police. Imagine if all that money that we're spending on security at the state level, because the states can't make gun laws, the states can't control the federal government. So the states are stuck spending money that should go to education in the classroom on a police officer who's going to stand outside the building to keep us safe.
Mm.
So to me, the politicians at the state level are stuck, right? The state has to do what our federal government tells us to do.
Mm.
And they say you can't regulate guns. And so the states have to spend money on police. The federal government sets the policy and everyone has to follow. In Canada, when they set up a state, a province, right? The province has to follow what the federal government says in Canada. So in Canada, they're trying to do a Better Disabilities Act at the federal level, because right now it's the provinces trying to piece together supports for students with autism and ADHD, and it's a provincial level healthcare system, and the federal government in Canada doesn't want to get involved because, well, they'll tick off one side or the other and may not win an election.
Mm.
Our political leaders are afraid to say education costs money.
Mm.
That's what it does. Education costs money.
Yeah. So I'm just, in the interests of the time that we've got left, I want to ask you some questions that maybe for the listeners they can take away some of your insights on specific things. So you mentioned earlier, well, we were just talking about, everything costs money, and you mentioned earlier that obviously there's that gap between the long waiting list for diagnosis, and because you're over in the States and I'm here, I don't know as much about what is available there, but I do have some listeners in the US, so this will be really helpful for them if you can share with me what you know about. Is there anything that a parent can do for their child in that gap between getting a diagnosis? Is there any support that they can turn to that says, look, we can't get you a diagnosis yet, but we can certainly start helping you if you think that your child is autistic or ADHD?
In all of our nations and all of our countries, we have very good autism societies. Now, in the United States, I do not support Autism Speaks, but we do have the Autism Society of America. There are also wonderful regional groups in the UK. Canada is a little bit behind on that, as is Australia, but the UK has some amazing autism support and ADHD support programs. And parents can go to those websites. So if you take a look at autism supports, whether it's in, as I said, in the UK or the US, the supports are there. And what the parent can do is you can go to those websites like the National Autistic Society in the UK or the Autism Society of America, and you can get some brochures, you can get some help. Again, there are groups as well for ADHD, but it's little things like, as I said, my wife will do the laminated checklist for my daughters. We do have chore charts. We have supports that we learned about through the support groups in our communities. If you live in a major city like London, there are even additional supports because you're in an urban environment that the universities tend to have really fantastic supports available. Most of those are free. Some of those here in Texas, my oldest daughter, for her anxiety, we found that Baylor University, which is not far from us, had a wonderful program that was free if you agreed to collect data and report the data back on the supports. So universities are a wonderful resource no matter where you live. In Canada, University of Toronto is very good at it. In the UK, of all things, I have found the LSE, the London School of Economics, has been doing some really great research on supports. So these universities and these organizations, it costs nothing to go to the National Autistic Society website in the UK, download the brochures on autism and ADHD, and think of some strategies. Also, as a parent, you just need to learn your child is going to forget things. Your child is going to make mistakes that maybe other children don't make. So you're going to have to accept that you need to be more patient with yourself and the child. You have to set aside time to decompress at the end of the day. One of the things that we do is, okay, well, what went well today? What didn't do well? What didn't go well the way we had hoped? How can we do better tomorrow? What supports can we put in place? So a lot of it as a parent is finding those free resources. Now that they're online, it's so much easier than it was just 20 years ago. And for our family, what we have found is, as I mentioned, music is something we all share. I love going to the concerts with my oldest daughter, her concerts. I love taking her to her music lessons. And what I do is I use the time that we're there before and after as I ask her, how was school today? What's going on? You know, how is band? How is math? How is science? Every opportunity you get, ask your child what's going on because they won't tell you. Especially with ADHD and autism, we get a lot of short answers that, you would expect of a normal 16 or 17-year-old, but even at a young age, how was school today? Fine. What did you learn? Math. Okay. So I need to be more precise. In math, what kind of problems were you doing? You have to be very specific and log those things. And as I said, it's a lot of checklists and a lot of communication. That is the key. With my students, it's the same thing. Listen, listen, listen. And sometimes what they tell you isn't verbal. The biggest lesson that I can tell parents of autistics and neurodiverse children in general, watch their reactions. Watch when they avoid something. See if they, if they keep taking off a jacket you just gave them, instead of getting angry, ask, why do you keep removing that jacket? And they might tell you, oh, well, it's the tag on the side is scratching my neck. But they may not tell you why they keep throwing the jacket down and, looking grumpy. They're not throwing a fit. There's a reason. Our oldest, one of the things we noticed was she really was sorting her food on the plate, and she puts her toys in neat rows. And so you've got to watch the nonverbal communication, and that's still them trying to tell you something. So that's it. It's listen and pay attention, because that's also a form of listening.
I think something that struck me whilst you were saying that is that obviously that is paying attention to the child, but sometimes in order to pay attention, because some of these things might, if you don't know what it is yet, some of these things might be causing challenges within the house, and this could be causing frustration for you and the child, and therefore tempers can be getting frayed. And I suppose if you're trying to give yourself that space to listen, you're probably also going to be looking after yourself and give yourself that extra time in between reacting to actually just stop and take notice and notice those things before making a judgment about what you need them to do, but what do they need from you.
The most difficult thing, and we struggle, as any family does, is reacting. We would react very strongly, very quickly, because we were finding food wrappers in the evenings from our youngest. And not just healthy food either, but Kinder bars and, other things, right? Her Nestle candy bars or whatever. And we got angry, right? I mean, that's the first response, anger. Why at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, when no one's around or everyone's in their bedroom, why are you taking food?
Yeah.
Right? So you get angry. That's the first reaction. It's a normal reaction. You're going to be angry. Then you figure out she's saying, well, I'm hungry when I go to bed and I can't sleep unless I eat. But the first reaction was, we're angry. We're going to lock the pantry, hide away everything. Well, now that we know that she gets hungry at night, and one of the side effects of some of the medications is that they can affect your diet. So you can get hungry, or a loss of appetite with some of the stimulants. So you can either lose your appetite or gain appetite based on the medication. So that was an important warning sign. She's going to bed hungry. She feels hungry. Something's wrong.
Hmm.
It's bothering her. She can't sleep. So, yeah, our first reaction was we were angry. We put a lock on the pantry. We were like, you can't be doing this. This is the wrong thing to do. And then it was like, so why are you doing it? Well, I'm really hungry at night.
Mm.
Oh, so then we looked up online. Oh, this medication can cause hunger.
Mm.
So, but our first reaction as parents was to be upset that she was eating candy at night because that's what she can get into. She
Hmm.
can't make herself dinner,
Yeah, yeah,
and she can't fire up the oven.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, part of it, even for us, is stepping back and saying, why did you do that?
Mm.
Why did you do what you did? Because it turns out there was a reason. She is really hungry at night. She's not able to sleep. So now what we do is we have um, nuts and dried fruit and things like that that are in an accessible place where if she gets hungry, and we've told her now, remember to go brush your teeth again and have a glass of water and go take yourself back to bed. But a lot of that communication, even as someone who's supposed to know this stuff, that
Yeah,
first reaction is, you don't, why in the world are you taking candy at night? Don't you dare do that. But
yeah.
then we step back and say, wait a minute, why are you doing it?
And I suppose it's also important to forgive yourself for, if you catch yourself and your first reaction was to get upset, because as long as you're able to sort of get there eventually, you need to forgive yourself. Otherwise, it's going to, particularly if you are, if you're not, if you're neurodivergent and you have, you know, issues with beating yourself up a little bit about things and being regretting things, it's just going to make it worse and spiral. I mean, I catch myself sometimes, time management is not my best skill, and so getting my kids ready for school, and particularly with one of my kids, I think she may be, we don't know yet, but she may have ADHD, and so the two of us together, time management and getting ready for school, it's a bit, I'm so concentrating on getting myself ready to get them ready, that I need them to, once I tell them to do some things, to do it. But she's not there. She's not able to follow instructions. So it's, and then we can clash because we need to be there on time. And so I need to, take a step back and say, I need to accommodate her, um and her challenges, whether that is to just sort of just give her one instruction at a time. Maybe I need to start getting ready earlier so that I'm able to then focus on her and not just focus on me getting out the door. Um, but yeah, but not beat myself up, because and one or two times it has happened where tempers have got frayed a little bit, but that doesn't help, because then that builds up um an issue for her emotionally about you know time and things like that. So
And it's going to happen. I lose my temper. My wife loses her temper. It happens. You say, why, it can, the only thing you can do is apologize. And I think parents need to learn to apologize to their kids and say, okay, mom and dad are sorry. We didn't know why you were doing this. We did get angry. We thought you did something wrong. It was kind of wrong. You should have come to us and said I was hungry. That's a lot of what we're doing now, is telling our daughters, you need to tell us what you want. You need to tell us instead of getting in trouble and then explaining it to us.
mhm.
But it is a learning process. I don't think parenting ever stops. It certainly won't stop when they're in at university. It won't stop. But a lot of it is sitting back down and saying, okay, I messed up today, honey. Dad was in a hurry. I see that you have your, and as I said, I see a keyboard behind you. I see the soundproofing. So I don't know about you, but a lot of my work is at home. Right
Mhm.
now, I'm in my office. Um, there's that whole don't bother dad. Dad is working. Dad has a deadline.
Mhm.
Uh, and when you're under pressure to get your work done on a deadline, you tend to get snippy. When I have to get to the university by 10:30 or whatever, I'm going to be in a rush to get, on the road to get to the university on time. Or Um, a lot of that's just being human and giving yourself permission to be human.
Hmm.
And the other thing is, too many parents of who either are themselves or have children who are neurodiverse, we aren't good about setting aside time because time management stinks. We end up burning through hours. I don't know about you, but I find myself working at 1 in the morning because I thought I had time and I didn't really have time. So now it's 1 in the morning and I'm recording video for a class or whatever. Horrible time management.
Hmm.
And that makes my temper flare too, is, hey, dad's tired. Dad got 4 hours of sleep. You know what? It's not her fault I got 4 hours of sleep. It's mine for promising someone I could get something done.
Yeah.
The hardest thing for me to do, and I don't know about, every other parent, but Laurence, I look at what you're doing there. I see it, like I said, professional gear. And for me, I promise too much. Oh, I can
Mm.
get this video recorded. I can get this audio recorded. Oh, yeah, I have plenty of time to do this. I promised to do a book chapter. And last night, my wife was looking at the text. The publisher told me you have 2,700 words. So, of course, I wrote over 3,000.
Mm.
So my wife was like, you can't turn this in. They've already said it has. So I'm working it late at night. It's my fault for
Mm.
promising to do too many things to too many people instead of prioritizing my health and my family.
Yeah.
And after
That
COVID,
was,
I wanted to make up all the time that I supposedly lost. Oh no, I've got to do this and I've got to go to that conference and go speak to these people. No, I don't.
yeah. I certainly did have that before I left my job last year, that sort of promising too much, or it's certainly led to burnout, but promising too much, and maybe that's to do with a bit of RSD. Like I need to do more, but or imposter syndrome. You
Yes.
want to definitely sort of say you can do it, because you think you're going to get called out somewhere else, but then that bleeds into your personal life. You're thinking about work the whole time, and then that's the easiest thing to cause you to like snap at your children, is when your mind is thinking about what you're not doing at work because you're spending time with your kids, but you're not spending time with your kids because your mind's elsewhere, and then something happens, and then it's easily done. But yeah, so taking time for yourself to make sure that you're in the best place to be parenting is probably a good tip.
And the ADHD brain, right? I'm at a conference. I was in Denver, Colorado at the end of May, start of June. And every night I thought, oh my gosh, I should be doing this. Oh
Mm.
no, this other thing isn't getting done. Oh no, I need to be doing that. I better not go out and get dinner because I should be grading papers or what. I mean, it was insane. I'm always thinking about what I need to be doing other than what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So even during a podcast or during, as I said, doing something else in my office here, I catch myself thinking, oh my gosh, I've got, these communication papers to grade, or I've got this other thing that I promised to do. I got this book chapter I need to be added. This list of to do when you have ADHD never goes away. And the
Mhm.
easiest way to deal with it for me is to sit down and make a list. So I have the list in front of me or on the computer, and I just remind myself, I cannot get to them all. It is not
Mhm.
going to happen. And none of it is essential. The world will still be here tomorrow. The same problem. I'm one person. I cannot solve everything, cannot do everything.
Mhm.
You mentioned imposter syndrome. So I'm a first generation in my family to go to a university to get degrees, to sit for placement and then to go. My wife is also a first generation university graduate. We are always looking at our colleagues, our peers. All of her friends that were in engineering school, their parents were engineers, or their parents were doctors, or their parents were lawyers. So there is this constant need to prove ourselves. Oh my gosh, half the people I teach with, their parents were professors.
Mm.
Someone just told me, well, when I was in Exeter, I'm like, oh, Exeter, Texas, Exeter, California. No, Exeter. Oh. So they were, they meant a rather nice university. Well, I went to I going to university, I went through imposter syndrome as a professor. I still go through imposter syndrome. So what happened this year was they needed someone to take on an extra course. And of course, I wanted to prove myself, and
Mm.
there's extra, a stipend. Oh yeah, I'll teach 5 courses instead of 4. Well, the next thing I know, I'm teaching 4 extra courses instead of just the 8 I would normally be scheduled for. I'm teaching 12. Well,
Wow.
this is ADHD that tells you, oh, I will have time. It is possible. It won't screw up my schedule. I can manage this. Well,
Mm.
I can barely manage getting out of the house in the morning on deadline. How was I going to manage teaching extra classes? What led me to think I could do that? And it was the imposter syndrome of I need to do it to prove I can be a teacher. Since nobody
Yeah.
else in my family, there's this part of me that is always thinking, oh, well, my colleague in the room next door knows that I'm the first in my family and knows I'm not that smart and knows I don't have this background where I know all the right French phrases or the right whatever. Um, you know, they have a background I don't have. They've traveled. My parents, did not travel, that kind of thing. So they have this cultural cachet that I lack. And so I'm always feeling like I need to learn and fit in and be one of them. And for someone with ADHD, you add imposter syndrome to it and work stress of, I don't want to fail, so I'm going to take on too much. So, of course, then you fail.
Mm.
Right? ADHD, the great thing is we're always afraid of failure. And so we set ourselves up to fail.
Yeah.
It's ironic, but that isn't that exactly what you do?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's as a parent now, I need to give my kids time. Last night we were at dinner, we were sitting at the table, and the 12-year-old, um, so Lee looks at us and says, you thought, let me get this right, Dad. You said we were going to do a few lessons in the morning during summer. Then we were going to go out and ride our bikes or go to the pool. And then we would do some crafts or we would do a science project. And then we would have dinner. Exactly how were we going to do all of these things you thought we could do during summer break? And I
Yeah.
realized, oh, she's right. I had actually in my mind scheduled like 5 or 6 different things we could do throughout the week during summer, the short summer break. And she's
Yeah.
right, we can't do it. We can't.
Yeah, my mind is exactly the same. I get excited, or if somebody says, "Oh, should we do this?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course." I have no filter for saying when, how, at what expense. It's literally like, yes, and then it's already too late. You've already and then yeah, you're setting yourself up to fail, um, because you don't have that time. But it's also so hard to rein it back in once the horse has bolted. You think you want to do that and you should do that and think, people aren't going to be happy unless they do that.
So I think as a parent who is ADHD, autistic with neurodiverse children, I need to be a better role model. And part of what I have determined this coming school year is part of being a better role model is saying no more often.
Hmm.
I'm sorry I can't do that extra task. I'm sorry I can't go to that conference. I cannot do this. My family must come first. My health must come first. Um, I look at myself on camera and I see, wow, I've got bags under my eyes. I'm tired all the time. Part of this was not saying no to teaching during the summer, which is
Hmm.
not, you know. So again, we need to take care of ourselves to take better care of our children.
Hmm.
It's ironic listening to my daughter, which I keep telling everyone that's what you need to do. Listen to your kids. My daughter was telling me, my 12-year-old was telling me, you've overscheduled us. We can't do it. And then you're going to be upset because we didn't do all the things you wanted to do.
Yeah.
But let's figure out what we can't do and cut it off the list.
Yeah. And I suppose, as well as, from what you were saying, in order to be, a good role model to your children, there's also that element of, as a parent, having the humility to say, well, I'm still learning. And
Yep.
so you're saying to your kids, you don't have to be perfect, because perfect is not is not a thing that exists. I'm still learning. And so if you consider that you'll always be learning, then you're not going to have failed essentially automatically.
I
So I
tell
think
them,
that's useful.
yeah,
Yeah.
tell them dad fails every day. There's something I didn't do. There's something that dad needs to do better. I think that humility, I hope that helps them. I tell them my first priority is that they just be a good person.
Hmm.
You know, the school can worry about grades and state testing and federal testing and all these placement exams, and the school can do those things. But not my number one thing is be a good person. And for me as a parent, that means listening to my kids and doing what I can to accommodate them, to support them. I listen to the experts. I do, as I said, go to my wife and I have attended training. We've joined support groups when necessary, found support online. And I tell the girls, I don't know this stuff. I was totally unfamiliar with dysgraphia. I met
Mm.
with a colleague who happens to understand it to try to figure out why is my youngest writing W's instead of M's. But she can read a book. She can type, fine, but she can't
Hmm.
write.
Mm.
Why is it that she can type, but she can't write? And so I told her, Dad knows nothing about this. Dad is not an expert. I won't pretend to be. And I think that humility is something teachers need too, right? Too many teachers. I am the teacher. I know this stuff. I tell my students right up front, I don't know everything. I am going to make mistakes. If you see me do something wrong, raise your hand or send me a message on the computer. Admitting I'm not perfect is hard, but it's something I need to do more often. And it's sort of my daily goal is to remind myself how imperfect I am.
Well, I think that is a wonderful note to end on. Certainly, humility is I think is a positive attribute to have, and to be able to show that to our children is, I think, a positive tip to send out to people. So, thank you very much for taking the time to spend with me and chat. It's been a fascinating conversation. I hope that the rest of your day goes well, and I'm very keen that you get some time to spend playing some music or doing some of the art, and I certainly hope that your safari goes well
It'll
later.
be fun. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the opportunity because too often, and when I meet parents, they feel guilty for just being human.
Mm,
When you have an autistic child, an ADHD child, when you have ADHD or are otherwise neurodiverse, it's so easy to get down on yourself and to feel bad. And I just want other parents to know this, don't feel bad about yourself. Just excuse yourself. Say, okay, I messed up. I will do better tomorrow.
mm, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day. Well, there we have it. Thank you so much for listening this far. If you want to hear more episodes, then please subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you use. It really helps to spread the word. So if you know anyone this episode could help, then please share it with your friends. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram at ADHD_goals, and you can find me on Facebook too. If you want to get in touch with the show, then you can email me at hello@adhdgoals.co. And finally, if you're struggling to manage your ADHD and you would like me to be your coach, then please head over to my website and get in touch. Until next time, bye for now.